Hey guys, this is Yoda, and this will be my preliminary Season 4 Mythic Plus tier list. As a disclaimer, the season is still a couple weeks out. We could get balance changes. Unlikely, but we could. So I might have missed something. I haven't even played with half these specs. I don't play a lot of these specs, so I might be wrong about some stuff, but be getting a lot of questions. This is how I see the meta shaping up. Start at the top. VDH, I think, is going to be by far the best tank in Season 4. It does the most damage, single target, does the most AoE, takes the least damage, is self-sufficient just like every other tank in most situations. And on top of that, there are a lot of AoE stops required in Season 4, and Sigil of Silence works on a lot of them. VDH is just going to be really powerful in all of those situations, and it fits really well into the Dragonflight dungeon pool. Shadow Priest and Mage, I think, are the other two that are hard locks. These two have been meta for every season, in my opinion. Season 1, some people were playing other stuff, but I think that's just because they didn't understand raid buffs yet. Shadow Priest and Mage just benefit the most from all the raid buffs, like Chaos Brand and Mage does the best prio target damage. Shadow Priest also does really good prio target damage. On top of that, they're really good at doing affixes. Mage also has double AoE stop and is immune to damage if played properly, and also does the most damage to the prio target. Even if you see a Mage doing like 20% lower overall than an Evoker or Warlock, just know that they're doing the most like to the boss and to the prio targets if played properly. Shadow Priest also has some required utility for a lot of dungeons. Like if you've ever tried to do a Braconite Hollow in a high key without Mind Soothe, it is hell. You have to pull some packs that you never want to fight. Mass Dispel is also useful for a lot of bosses. Even though it's nerfed, it's still nice to have it every now and then at least. So yeah, these three I don't think are going anywhere. Pretty sure they're at the top. Next, go over possible meta. So a lot of people have been looking at Warlock, deleting the first pull of every dungeon, doing like 5 million or more DPS. And you know what? That is really strong. Warlock could possibly be meta. I'm putting it there. I'm putting Demo and Destrolock both there because I think as a DPS player, you should be able to play both if you're like a DPS Warlock player. But I think Destro is probably a bit stronger because there's a few dungeons where Imp Dispel is very strong. One of the main reasons, actually, I think that Warlock is good, such as Halls of Infusion first boss, Braconite first boss. And if you play Demo, you can't take Imp Dispel unless you lose like massive amounts of damage, which you're not going to do. You just play Destro at that point. So I think you're going to want to be able to play both. The reason I don't have Destro as like a hard lock is that firstly, it doesn't give a raid buff. And second, it's somewhat vulnerable. I'm not going to say it's squishy, but like I think if in rot fights compared to something like an augmentation evoker, you're not going to be able to, it's going to be harder for your healer to do the boss if you're playing Warlock instead of Evoker. And also, one of the Warlock's main strengths is that they are insanely powerful on the first pull of every dungeon, or every pull that you have lost or whatever that's really big. But on live keys, it's possible to zone in as a DPS instead of your healer, and then rezone as a healer for after that. So the first pull often gets blown up whether you're playing Warlock or not. So I think that detracts a little bit from Warlock on live keys. On top of that, like I said, they don't help the healer that much. Hellstones are good. They are pretty tanky. It's not they're squishy or anything, but there are some heal checks that you may fail with a Warlock that you would have made with an Evoker. So I'm not going to say they're like for sure meta. They're just possible meta. Next, as we were saying, is the Evoker. If you play Evoker, you should be able to play both, I think, because Augmentation, they're really good at making their tank and your healer safe. They're really good at passing heal checks, but in Season 4 especially, they're not really good at doing a lot of damage. Their scaling, I think, is worse as the patches go because you're getting more secondaries, and all the secondaries are garbage for Augmentation Evoker. They are getting a legendary, but like I said, Dev is also getting a legendary, and Dev is also getting a buffed Season 2 tier set, and Season 2 was already their best tier set. So Dev is actually looking insanely strong right now, DPS wise. I think their AoE is probably not quite as good as Destrolock. If you're bringing an Evoker to your group because you want to pass some heal checks, then it's nice if they can play Dev in some dungeons where it's more important that you pass the DPS checks, because there's DPS checks, and some dungeons are hard to heal, like Alderman and Niltheris. Some dungeons are hard to DPS, like Brackenhide, particularly the last boss with the totems. I think you should be able to play both Evokers, basically, to fit both situations. This is probably my ideal comp. It's just the same as Season 3. You just play, sometimes your Evoker can play Dev, and you're playing I want to play Rest of Druid again, too. But, Warlock is strong. They're definitely stronger in Season 4 than Season 3, so gotta give them the nod. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Moonkin. So, as we all know, raid buffs determine Mythic Plus viability, as long as everything's balanced, which so far it looks like that's Blizzard's intention. And if you don't play Rest of Druid, then Moonkin does provide Mark of the Wild. It's going to be very valuable that way. If you don't play Rest of Druid healer, then you would probably play Mistweaver or Prez, in my opinion. Mistweaver has shown that it's extremely strong healing wise. It basically can heal any content in the game. And in a big pull, they literally just push one button and everyone's permatopped. So that's cool. Prez, similar to the other evokers, is getting the legendary for season 4, which is making them really strong. On top of that, their season 1 tier set is their best one. It gives them a lot of damage, especially single target. If you ever watch them in Braconite Hollow, they're usually doing more than the tank to totems on the last boss, which is very powerful. Stasis is also uniquely very strong in a lot of these Dragonflight dungeons. For instance, on the first boss of Algathar, let's say you're playing Prez Evoker with Warlock, you can stasis off the first bleeds, like you can cauterize like 3 people and save that to your stasis. And then cauterize, then the first bleed is basically stasis, and you banish the tree, the triad, and then you like you get that one low and then you kill it like as you get the second set of bleeds. So yeah, there's a lot of cheeses that stasis is really good for. So Prez Evoker is looking really strong for next season, and it's definitely a contender for quote-unquote possible meta. All right, next we'll go over stuff that I think is really strong. Like if you're doing title level keys or basically any keys that aren't literally cutting edge world first keys, I think these will all be able to get the job done perfectly fine. First of all, the second best tank I think is going to be Bear. First of all, it provides a raid buff that Paladin doesn't, and it has something that even VDH doesn't have. It has After the Wildfire and Dream of Cenarius. It's very good at helping your healer on rot fights. And that's Innervate 2, and with the Season 2 set, it's going to do a lot of damage and be very tanky. So I think Bear is very good. If it weren't for VDH being like the god king of everything, I think Bear would probably be the best tank for the next season. The best comp for Bear, you could play Bear just like in the VDH comp and just have a Bear instead, and it'd be fine. You can also, Bear also enables you to play like a physical damage comp with Rogues and Mistweaver. I think that comp is very good. We played that in season 3 to decent success. But yeah, Bear is very strong. I just think VDH fits the dungeon pool a lot better. Is also just stronger tuning wise, like it just does more damage. Next up, we have Prot Paladin. So even though I do love Prot Paladin, I fear they have suffered a decent loss going into season 4. The season 3 tier set, I think is better defensively, if not offensively. And on top of that, they are missing like something they had in season 3, which is that in season 3, there were a few dungeons that were tailored specifically, it felt like, for Prot Paladin. Like in Waker's Manor, there's just 2 soul charmers in the dungeon, or even more than that if you want, that are not CCable, but are interruptible. Specifically that. Same thing in Everbloom. There are a bunch of mobs that are like that, which is Paladin's niche because Avenger's Shield works on those mobs and no other tanks like interrupts work. Those are gone. And then in season 4 also, it's more of a rot healing check than a one-shot check. So Paladin is much better at helping with one-shots than rot healing. And on top of that, you know, the ward trinket from Aberrus is available to all the tanks, and it's on a 1-minute cooldown. So Paladin's like 1-minute attack is no longer unique utility. It's just like something that they have. So all in all, I think Paladin's taken a hit, but they're still definitely really strong. They can carry pugs. They can, like, you know, solo interrupt. They can still solo interrupt a caster or interrupt a bunch of casters while your team, like, you know, kind of just AFKs. And they still have B-Res. And they're still pretty good defensively, so I'll put them at strong. Next, we have Prot Warrior. I think Prot Warrior is kind of suffering right now from just the VDH effect, where VDH is better than all the tanks at everything. So unless you're specifically able to, like, help your healer like a Paladin or Bear is, you kind of just like, why aren't you playing? Everyone's kind of just like, why aren't you playing VDH? But, you know, Spell Reflect and Warrior does have its own, a bunch of interrupts on its own. Like it has Shockwave, it has AoE Kick, it has Fear, and Spell Reflect is also really good in a lot of dungeons. So I would say Warrior is pretty strong, but, you know, not VDH. Next, we'll go over the melees. So you'll notice melees are completely missing from meta or possible meta. Unfortunately, you know, the way raid buffs work, like there's just a mage and a DH in every group. So if you do physical damage, unlucky, you just do 10% lower if your group is playing the correct classes. So GG. But that said, you know, 10% is only 1 key level. If you're doing title or even higher than title, like I said, unless you're literally doing world first keys, these are all perfectly viable and they can all get the job done. So Outlaw Rogue is probably stronger than in season 3, because in season 3 your trinkets are really bad. Like I'm literally playing a tank trinket on my Rogue on live. In season 4, however, we're getting access to Boon of the Storm Eater's Boon, which, you know, it can get you killed. It roots you for 10 seconds, but it does insane AoE, and there's also a bunch of other good trinkets like the Icon, CCT, Dragonfire Bomb, whatever. So your trinkets are getting a massive upgrade. As a result, I think Rogue is going to be pretty strong. Probably the best melee. You know, you're immune to damage pretty much if you play properly. Like you have evasion and feint, and you baseline play really high verse. So I think Rogue will be really good going to next season, just not meta. Ret is also extremely strong. You still have your legendary. It's probably the best pug melee in my opinion, because it has battle res and you have 1-minute sack, which can help your tank out. It can help anyone else out obviously too, but mostly having sack on it, like having double external basically because you have it on your DPS, is really useful for a tank. They can also do all the affixes unlike Rogue. You know, they can dispel Afflicted, they can turn evil on Incorp, whatever. So red is still really strong. The main issue with them, I found, is that you have to like, their talent tree is kind of awkward because you have to pick AoE or single target a bunch of times in a row. So usually either you do bad AoE or you do bad single target, one of those, which is kind of unfortunate. Just bad talent tree design, but what can you do? Next on the list is Windwalker. Windwalker is kind of like Ret. You can do basically all the affixes, and they don't suffer from the same talent tree problems, but they also don't have like sack. They can't B-res. So I put them slightly after Ret. I think they do really good damage. They just, you know, are a melee. So you show up to the key and you're doing 10% less than everyone else. Like I said, Havoc, I think, is in the same boat. They do really good damage. It was unfortunate for them. They were looking really strong in season 3, especially at the start, but then they just got nerf after nerf after nerf. So I think right now they're really strong. They can get the job done, but they're not as strong as a lot of the meta classes or even some of the other melee. For the rest of these, you know, pretty much just gonna be the same story. I don't think any of them are as strong as like Ret or Rogue, but if you're bringing these, they all do pretty good damage, and they're all, you know, pretty tanky if played properly. They can all get the job done, and if you're inviting them, you're not going to invite them. Like, this list is probably not in the correct order after Havoc, but if you're inviting these people, you're not inviting them because they're like, you know, 6th instead of 9th. You're inviting them because you know the player that's playing them is really good, and he's able to do damage, and he knows how to survive. So that's the rest of the melee. For the ranges, I think the other mage specs are strong, just not as good as Fire. Frost in particular is decent damage-wise, but they have this handicap where they're forced to root the mobs, and a lot of the meta AoE stops, like Evoker stops, you know, Typhoon, Sigil of Chains, get griefed by that. So like if that ever happens, that can potentially wipe your key. That's, in my opinion, that is Frost's main weakness. So yeah, I don't really like playing with Frost mages that much. Arcane could potentially see play if like it's specifically good based on their cooldowns on a certain boss, but I doubt it. The rest of the range, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really play them, but I know Ellie and BM Hunter both do really good damage. Their main weakness is that they're vulnerable to one-shots. But again, you know, one-shots are not that crazy in Season 4, so I can see them being played, just not in like the top level keys. So some of the classes I'm not sure about, like I just haven't seen anyone playing them at all on PTR. Brew, I think, is probably definitely worse than Paladin, but probably better than Blood Decay. But honestly, like that, if you're not playing with a VDH, basically, at that point, you're just playing with that tank because they're a good player. Like, they're able to survive the key, and they're able to shot call, and they know the routes, blah, blah, blah. If you're not playing with VDH, basically, you're only playing with this tank because he's good, in my opinion. So it doesn't really matter where they are on the tier list. The rest of the DPS Warrior, I honestly just haven't seen any play. I don't even know what tier set they're getting, but, you know, they do bring Battle Shout. If you're playing the Rogue comp with a Bear, you probably want to bring a Warrior for Battle Shout too. Healing-wise, I just haven't played with any Shamans or Priests. Mostly because the main healer I play with is a Druid main. Can't really gauge their strength. Priest is a little bit awkward because I think Shadow Priest is extremely strong. So it's kind of awkward to like overlap raid buffs with another priest, but it's also not that bad. I've heard Holy Priest does a lot of damage, but like I said, I haven't played with any of these healers, so it's hard for me to gauge how strong they are. I know Shaman got their Season 1 set, and they were really good in Season 1, so they could potentially be like up here or even here, but like I said, never played with one, so can't tell. For some need buffs, Blood Decay, unfortunately, ever since Dragonflight launched, just got their talent tree reworked, like just like everyone else, but their talent tree is horrendous. Like, there's a bunch of dead talents everywhere. You can't get the talents you actually want, at least not all of them. And all the tanks kind of are self-sufficient, so they're like gig of, oh, I don't need any healing, is like, that's not specific to them anymore. And then also they're a bit squishier, I think, especially compared to VDH. So I think Blood Decay, hopefully they just get a full talent rework because they need it, and they're strong again, but for now, they're not looking strong. Obviously, you know, if your tank is good, he's living, you know, if your tank is able to survive the level of keys you want to do, then he can get the job done. But I think DK needs buffs at this point. HPAL, I haven't played with that much, but from the few keys I've seen, I think they're really good in most keys, but they suffer when they actually have to heal. Their throughput, I think, is not quite as good compared to the other healers, so if you run into healing checks, then they will suffer. Obviously, I haven't played with that many HPALs, so I don't really know for sure, but I'm gonna put them at needs buffs for now. Assassination Rogue, unfortunately, just got over-nerfed after they were kind of strong after the rework in Season 3. They were getting PI every fight, and then Blizzard unfortunately buffed them based on that, or nerfed them based on that, so yeah, they're in the dumps right now. MM Hunter is kind of like the other hunters, except somehow even more squishy, so that's a no-go in high keys, in my opinion. And then Aflock, I don't really know that much about, but from what I've heard / seen, they do pretty good AoE, like comparable to Destro. But then when you pull the boss, Destro suddenly does real damage and Affliction Lock doesn't. So yeah, I think you just play Destro at that point. So that is it for the tier list. Please keep in mind, after watching this tier list, in World of Warcraft, it's way more important to invite a player that's good at playing their spec than just like someone that's playing a meta spec. Especially like if they're at least like here, or if they're playing a tank or a healer, if they have shown that they're able to get the job done, it doesn't matter what they're playing. Like this raid buff situation that I harp on a lot, 10% damage is only 1 key level. You know, the title is usually like 4 levels or something, or even more below the max level that's possibly doable. So if someone is able to play their spec like really well, then you should just play with them regardless of what they're playing. That said, I've been getting a lot of questions about tier lists, so this is what I'm coming up with, and that's it. Thanks everyone for watching. Peace out.